and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this episode, we're going to take a hard look at the changing dynamics of OBOR, China's One Belt, One Road initiative, the US-China trade relationship, and what does all this mean for the Indian economy. I know that when it comes to China, one cannot really look at either of these issues divorced from geopolitics and strategic concerns. But since it is a show that focuses primarily on the macroeconomy, we're going to try and step back and look at these recent developments through the economic prism. And joining me in the discussion are three experts. Alka Acharya, Professor of the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and formerly Director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, Rajat Nag, former MD, Asian Development Bank, and T.S. Vishwanath, Principal Advisor, APG SLG Law Offices in Delhi. Welcome to the show, Alka, Rajat and Vishy. Let me start by taking the first, the recent rumblings against OBOR that we're seeing in country after country, Malaysia, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, with civil society compelling governments to take a relook at this initiative. Because, on prima facie, it seemed a great initiative. Chinese, willing to put money to build scarce infrastructure in these Asian countries, and a win-win situation for all concerned. So what has changed, Alka? Why has the dynamics really changed?
I would say that we are looking certainly at an increasingly larger debate on this question. Earlier there wasn't. And at the moment what has happened is a reaction from three countries at the official level. So out of the 63 odd countries that have signed up for this BRI infrastructural network, we have three countries where new governments have come to power, and they have actually based their entire election campaign on re-examining some of these deals. And it's not just the Chinese deals, but they also cover other deals that the government signed, which basically raise issues of corruption, raise issues of unethical judgments regarding land and other scarce resources. They have played on the local sentiments against these kind of decisions, and so the new governments basically have said we need to relook the contract as such. It's not so much what the Chinese are bringing into it, but the nature of the contract, which they believe has not only shortchanged them, so it's not entirely in their interest. They have taken up land which has environmental concerns, has local people's interests in. So it's, and of course the corruption at the top. So there is a lot of local politics, there is a lot of larger questions which were not raised earlier. So I won't say that this is a frontal attack on BRI or this is a response against the Chinese investment per se, but the nature of the deal that has been signed.
Would you agree with that assessment, Rajat? Is it angst against the corruption, the local politics, or is it suspicion of a growing Chinese influence? And also, is there some kind of a contradiction between India's desire for greater regional connectivity and our, unwillingness to get involved in any way with OBOR? So, two questions.
No, I think I'd agree with Alka. Let me build on that. I think what you're seeing is actually a very welcome development because I think the initial initiatives maybe did not get the scrutiny that it deserved. So one is, of course, the whole issue of governance that you have mentioned, but also the viability of the projects. Now, at a macro level, on the demand side, there is no question that Asia needs a huge amount of infrastructure. ADB did a study last year talked about $1.7 trillion a year for the next 15 years. And the multilaterals, ADB, World Bank, others finance less than 5%. So there's no question about the need for that. And therefore, the countries are obviously very eager to take the money which comes from China. But
there are strings.
Well, I was just going to come to that. There are strings, but even before the strings, there are issues about the viability, financial viability, economic viability, environmental viability, social viability. And I think these projects were not getting and still don't get the scrutiny they deserve. So to answer your first question, I would say that that scrutiny prompted in some cases that Alka has mentioned about the local elections, Malaysia and other countries, is very welcome. Now, from India's perspective, I think as everything between India and China, they're multi-layered and, you have to look at it in all that aspect. First, India quite rightly sees the Belt Road Initiative as a bit of a panda hug, I call it, particularly in South Asia. And we are seeing what's happening in terms of the Gwadar port or Hambantota or the Kyupu port in Myanmar. But on the other hand, I think India will have to consider the larger geostrategic issues with China. Two largest economies in Asia, largest populations, two largest populations in the world, etc. So I think India's view should not be taken in a black and white for or against. India is obviously trying to see how to get more concessions or more sort of, issues on the table. And my view is that BRI is here to stay.
Vishy, but my question to you really is that the rumblings that we're seeing against OBOR, would they have been much less had you thought of OBOR as a commercial project? Had we designed it with, not taking into consideration the geostrategical interests, which of course are always there with China. Because here it could have been a win because Chinese companies have surplus capital, we have a need for infrastructure. But the problem was that OBOR was never really a purely commercial project. So is that the problem, and can it be tweaked?
Sure, Mythili. I mean, I think I also agree with what both Alka and Rajat said, and agreeing with you as well, saying that I think this is not a commercial project at all.
Okay.
The way I view it, frankly, is that when we look at the OBOR, the BRI, I think it's primarily looking at China's vision of getting economic dependency of the countries in and around.
Okay.
I think it is largely geopolitical in the sense that it would want to have control over what's happening in this region, because please understand that all its ships pass through this region, so they would want control over this region. And I think while I agree with Rajat that while India's position is strong and we need to look at it from a slightly different perspective, I think why India is not committed to it as yet, I think goes far beyond the fact that it's not just commercial, but also the fact that most of the countries who are committed to BRI today seem to be coming under a lot of pressure. So it is not an aid, or it is not anything else that's coming in, but I think it is a very subtle way of economic dependency that these countries are
some kind of Chinese hegemony,
which I'm seeing in the region. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alka, given what's been happening, do you think the Chinese would tweak the way they've structured OBOR, and what kind of tweaking do you think it's possible? Can they kind of distance themselves from the politics, or at least pretend that there's no politics involved? Because to my mind, there does seem to be a fair amount of suspicion of the Chinese growing dominance.
See, they're the new kids on the block with so much of money around, and as was said earlier, that we are crying out for infrastructure. They have the resources. Other agencies, international agencies, do not have similar kinds of
money available.
So there has been a response. Now, to say, I'd slightly shift from what earlier she said, that these are not commercial. I think if you look at the origins of the Belt and Road, it starts off from a very, very strong domestic requirement to offload their overcapacity in steel and cement and chemicals. And clearly, China, because it is China, you can't separate the political issues from the commercial issues. Right. Whether this is their great vision for dominance and hegemony, I'm not too sure, because I don't think that they can ride roughshod over Eurasia. You can have country A or B or C somewhat weaker in their bargaining power, but I don't see them being able to take just what they want out of these countries. Now, India has moved into Hambantota. Question I want to really raise is that the Chinese clearly are concerned about the reactions that are coming. I was recently in China, and they were meticulously taking notes about this perception problem and how do they need to address it. They clearly want to address this sense that this is their great strategic kind of a ploy.
Would it help if they employed more of the locals and bringing in their own people? I think they come with hordes of their own people, and that's what kind of creates a lot of angst among those local populations.
That is one thing that we did discuss, and and the fact that transparency issues, these were the two issues that I kept on raising, that we really are not too sure about what is the nature of the project, what is the nature of the contracts, what are the implications in terms of technology transfers and labor issues and all. And they said that they were trying to address it. So for India, the problem, I mean, coming from, I don't know, because of the CPEC, That's really where we actually begin and end as far as others, because with CPEC, the sovereignty concern, it really puts a complete stoppage to our ability to consider it. And then BCIM on this side, which predates OBOR, which the Chinese then brought into the BRI network. So India really has to now give serious thought as to how they want to respond, because all our neighbors now, recently Nepal, they all signed on to this BRI. And I think we need to decide whether we want to just sit and watch the Chinese build railroads and roads and harbors all around us.
You don't see the latest developments as some kind of a setback?
No, I don't think so. I think what is going to happen is that they're going to renegotiate the deal. They will address the concerns.
But they'll have to give up something when they renegotiate, no?
Let me bring in a couple of points just to sort of, support what you're saying, Alka. One thing about BRI is, contrary to what one expects from anything Chinese, there is no grand blueprint, sorry.
Do the Chinese ever not have a blueprint? Sorry,
no,
that's the Indian view of things. They always have a blueprint.
No,
maybe sometimes
not on this
very
one.
Clear.
In a way, this is a very clever articulation of a grand design. Even a project in Australia, in the state of Victoria, is considered to be part of BRI, just because it conforms to one of the 5 pillars that they've laid out. So BRI is anything that BRI says it is. In a way, it could be a project in Africa, it could be a project in India, it can be a project anywhere else. And I think it is intentional, because they want it to be a way that anything that conforms to whatever their objectives are can be said is BRI. That's one. The other thing, which is a very important point, Alka, you mentioned, and I've said this very publicly, and there are future occasions when we should discuss this in greater detail. India has to choose whether they're going to be inside the tent influencing it or outside the tent. BRI is a grand design, and certainly in not only South Asia but also in Central Asia. And Central Asia is actually even bigger because the stakes are higher, this Eurasian connectivity.
Southeast Asia.
And Southeast Asia, of course. No, what I'm saying is that even if you leave South Asia, Southeast Asia, going Eurasia is. So I think India, as obviously a very important economic power, a growing economic power, and somebody who China very much wants to do business with. I mean, if you look at the
but on their terms, that is the sense that we get. China wants to do business with us, but on
when
their
I say
terms.
business, I don't mean just commercial business, political business. I think India will have much more influence by being engaged in this issue, because these are very important, not just CPEC, just the overall. So my point always has been that BRI is too important to be just left to China.
That's true.
I would actually slightly disagree with you on that, Rajat. For the simple reason, I think I agree with you that if you want to influence a decision, like if it is the WTO, I mean, I fully agree with the fact that we do want to see India completely engaged and being in the room, but not in any initiative which is led by one country. This is, for me, the BRI or the OBOR is something which is so led by China and so dominated by China. It doesn't help if you're in the room or not in the room. If you if you'll allow me 2 minutes, Mythili, the fact is that India would like a multipolar region.
Absolutely.
And that's the reason we are not also part of what the Americans and the Japanese and the others are wanting to also have an infrastructure thing here, which would in a way be, they think that would kind of contradict what the OBOR is doing. But India doesn't want to be part of that at all. I think it's in larger India's interest in the geopolitical thing of keeping it as multipolar as possible. If the Chinese could actually, like what they did with the investment bank, where they don't have a veto power, where they did actually talk about the fact and said they do, but the fact is that they at least said that they don't have a veto power. Also, so the fact is that we want to look at something where there is a far more where we have bargaining strength and we are equal partners. I don't think we should get into something where we are not an equal partner.
And perhaps more greater transparency. And we don't have the underlying fear that the might of the state is behind the Chinese companies that are building this infrastructure. That really is. But can I take a break, Rajat? Okay, very quickly.
Those are 2 different points, and I fully agree with actually in a way both. Transparency, absolutely, and that's the point you're making. Rishi, I could not agree more, and I've written and spoken on this multipolarity, and India must be a part of it. India does not want it to be a China-centric. It should be multipolar. But the fact is that China is putting bulk of the bill.
Where are the resources?
And therefore, I think India, it should push for multipolarity. But it will have greater influence in pushing it if it's part of the dialogue. Otherwise, it won't.
That's true, but maybe we'd like to be there as an equal partner. But I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. So please do bear with us. We'll be back very soon. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm discussing with three experts on what the changing dynamics of China's One Belt, One Road initiative stands for. What does it mean? As also, if possible, I'll touch upon US-China trade relations to see what they mean for the Indian economy. Rajat, I think all of us agree that there is a need for greater transparency, and that is the hope that the latest developments, like we're seeing in the case of Pakistan, for all the reasons that you mentioned, like Pakistan also needs Chinese capital to build their infrastructure. But now that Pakistan has to go to the IMF is demanding much greater transparency about what are the debts to China, etc. So these kind of developments, will they not work to improve OBOR and hence make it more possible for India to look at OBOR with less suspicious eyes, as it were?
Oh, absolutely. So I could not agree more with the point, Vishy, that you were mentioning just before the break. There needs to be multipolarity, and more people in the at the table, the better. And having IMF coming in is obviously very positive in terms of forcing that transparency. And this is one of the major criticisms people have made, including India, that we don't really know what's in BRI. We don't have transparency. We don't know how the contracts are awarded, etc. So I think we should certainly push for more transparency to the extent possible. And my point is, we can push for it if we are part of the dialogue. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is that China also doesn't want to be seen to be totally China-centric. So they will probably accommodate more. They will never get to what we would call international standards, be it on procurement, be it on environment, be it on social. But I think we should definitely push for more transparency and accountability, no question about it.
Alka, is it possible for us, can we sit out, as it were, and then wait for things to improve in OBOR? Or will we have to kind of, join and then try to make the changes? Do you see the Chinese bringing greater transparency, greater accountability, all the things that India has been demanding?
No, I'm afraid this waiting it out, sitting it out and watching the entire landscape transform before your eyes at a rate that is really quite amazing. Look, 5 years ago when the new government came into power, their stated objective was that the neighborhood comes first. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you make yourself important to your own neighborhood, and how do you really ensure that you are the driver here when you have China coming in such a big way, and you have this touch me not attitude about the Chinese involvement?
Okay.
I think the initial discussions which have shown that there is a possibility of third country partnerships with China, India, Japan, maybe China, India and Afghanistan, I think we have to explore this much more deeply and systematically, because we do not want to be just bystanders while our neighbors are getting on with their own growth stories. And you see, the important thing is that you are critical to the economies here in a way, but you are allowing the initiative because of a lack of a very proactive strategy. Today, look at the way, the Nepalese, for instance, I was talking to them. They said, look, when are you going to get your act together? When are you going to do things? Our problem is that we promise so many things, our lack of capacity to implement, our lack of resources, but we have other resources. We have to capitalize on our strengths, and we need to bring this on the table with our neighbors, with China. I think that is something that you cannot avoid anymore now.
But the fact, Rishi, is that, you talk about Pakistan, talk about Nepal, you really don't have Pakistani companies or Nepali companies. You have the capacity of many of our companies. So is it that the Indian companies feel that they're disadvantaged because Chinese companies have advantage of access to cheap capital, the kind of backing of the state, which I believe they do, and I could be wrong, Alpa says no, but the kind of backing, so Indian companies feel that they're not really competing on a level playing field. If they were sure of that level playing field, that much of the suspicion, doubt from companies also would go as far as BRI is concerned?
Absolutely. When you're looking at it from an Indian industry perspective, I'm not talking about industry in India, but I'm talking about Indian industry, and I want to make that separation. From an Indian industry perspective, there is at least a very strong perception, and some of it may be right, that the Chinese are going out there and helping them build and export far more and do a lot more than what they're doing now. But talking about what Alka was saying, that and Alka and Rajat have been saying about India should be part of the BRI and the OBOR, my thought is slightly different, because And the reason for that is I think the BRI and the OBOR is just one part of it. If you look at China, they're getting under the skin of each of our neighbors, and they are, from financial markets to the stock markets to other infrastructure projects, everything they are going there. India certainly does not have that money power to do that. So does that mean that just because we are not able to, finance some of those stuff, does it mean that we just go and enter the room and start doing stuff as what China would want? I certainly don't think that if you get in without the money, and if you get in there without the kind of financial strength and other strength that China really has, you would have much of a power to influence. Because once you have agreed to be part of a group, you can't be sitting in there and asking questions. But the fact is that I think we need, and India has been doing its bit in terms of trying to improve its relationship with China. It certainly has not been doing everything that, against China. Starting from the Wuhan summit, there have been huge strides which India has made with China, I think, in terms of
So just
its
a wild
relationship.
thought, Rishi, over here. If China were to kind of give the capital, but let Indian companies do the building, would that be much more acceptable for us? And do we have the capability?
Do we really want to be contractors, or do we want to be someone who wants to do far more than that? I mean, that is a question I think we need to seriously understand. Do we want Chinese money to build our infrastructure? Do we want to be contractors, or do we want to be building our own strategic thought in terms of how do we want this region to be, and how do we want to influence the region, is something I think these are two completely separate things, and we need to discuss it a little more separately. I don't think the two are intertwined in a way.
But they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, I have no problem with what you're saying, Rishi, but I don't think it can be or should be one or the other. I think the Indian industry would be very keen to participate in BRI projects. As a matter of fact, many of my conversations with them is very positive. As a matter of fact...
But will it be a level playing field? Because access to cheap capital, Indian companies have to pay such high rates of interest.
Mythili, I think we just have to not only think big, but act big. We can't constantly keep saying, will we do this for us? I think we have to say, what can we assert? What can we do? Why should we talk about cheap capital? We're talking about our companies who are world class. So yes, level playing field is a critical thing.
Yeah.
Okay, the states, the northeastern states of India, they are very keen on BRI precisely because it makes a difference to them. So I think the discussion should not be either or. It has to be comprehensive, in which obviously business comes in, politics comes in, geo-economic strategies comes in. And I think the point, I think in a way I'm making is that we should recognize that China and India are going to be, they indeed are, the two major poles in a multipolar Asia, multipolar world. And I think we have to act that way. Not being in the game, to me, is actually a non-starter.
The other side of this not being in the game is the fact that then what you are doing is virtually pushing a certain kind of a choice on your neighbors.
Right.
Okay, it becomes like a question of, well, the Chinese are giving us more, but the Indians are objecting. Now, who do I choose? Who?
But you don't think that they now feel they're paying too high a price?
No, that's what I'm saying. That these, see, part of it is, of course, a certain projection about, especially the Hambantota and the Gwadar ports and the kind of information that came out from these countries about what was involved, and so we got to know about these things, and now gradually more information is coming out, and there are bound to be repercussions, and the Chinese will feel the heat because they will obviously, where they have done unethical practices and so on, but they're not stopping that. They're not, even Mahathir, for instance, he did not say that he's going to cancel the entire thing. He just said we're going to
but we don't know what that renegotiation means.
So that's between the two countries, of course. But I'm simply saying here that we need to, of course, we can look at a comprehensive thing, but what is it are we bringing to the table? And that's why I said we have to play to our strengths. Our strengths are in human resources of a very particular kind. Our strengths are world-class companies and leaders in certain IT fields and so on. Are those kind of strengths that we can bring there and also leverage those? Because somewhere I feel that we are not looking at our South Asian region in terms of a unity where
that's true. But the only thing I think perhaps India is hoping for greater transparency, which is why we stayed out at the BRI summit in earlier this.
Silent and you're not going to get.
But also let me just quote to you what the EU participants said. They blocked a resolution, a statement on trade on the grounds that it was not based on transparency and co-ownership. So I think maybe if we can get China to push China towards greater transparency and co-ownership, maybe then many of our reservations would disappear. Would you agree, Bishi? So that really is the problem.
Absolutely.
And as long as the rest of the world also puts pressure pressure on
You have
China.
to push them.
So then maybe we can rework, and then maybe we will, perhaps be able to be win-win situation for both sides.
Absolutely, Mythili. I think what we are seriously looking at is co-ownership, and I don't think that's going to come with the current way the BRI is functioning.
Okay.
I think it needs a complete relook, and I don't think any of the other countries are also very excited about it. And I would. I don't think it's only the MEA which is against the BRI. I mean, I think including because from what Rajat said that the Northeast or some of the companies are interested. Some of the companies I've talked to are very wary because they are very clear that the BRI is certainly not something to give India contracts or Indian companies contracts. The BRI was conceived with the idea, as Alka started off by saying, that to give the Chinese companies far more markets and to give far more. And I don't think that's going to happen in the current structure. But yes, if there is a rethink on this by the Chinese in terms of co-ownership, I think India should welcome it.
I think we are also slightly, there is a degree of confusion. I don't know whether you people noticed when Ram Madhav recently visited China, he made the statement that we would like to have China build infrastructure in the Northeast.
That's true.
It wasn't picked up at all.
Entirely true. We would like them, but we'd like them a little bit more on our terms. I think that really is the essence of it. But Rajat, I'm afraid we've really run out of time completely. So thank you so much for this very interesting discussion. I think clearly there is that wariness about Chinese companies, but if we can see some kind of tweaking that brings in greater transparency, greater confidence, it could be win-win for all concerned. Thank you so much, Rajat, Alka, Vishy, for joining me in this discussion. Thank you also for watching. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.